understand a lot about neuroplasticity and how it works, and maybe what the limits are on that. So we've got to look hard at that. And it looks like we humans are really great at this, but the other animals on the planet are not quite so great at it. They're probably, good at it to some degree, but, I think there must be extra tweaks of some kind that are enabling us to be so good at this constant process of self-reinvention. It might just be, of course, that because we have language and we created these symbolic environments, that's driving the constant process of self-reinvention so that we fit things to ourselves in extremely good ways. Maybe if we paid the same kind of attention to fitting things to other animals in really good ways, they could be enhanced and transformed and extended in ways that we don't currently imagine. Given all that plasticity and permeability, what do we do with our sort of old familiar notions like persons and minds and agents? Do they all have to kind of change too? I think they do. I think we need a notion of personhood, which is kind of less fixed to one biological form than we maybe currently have. And what limits the range of all this self-reinvention? Maybe there are basic neural limits. Maybe there's limits on biological working memory that actually fix the limits of how much tech you can sort of profit from, sort of moment by moment. Maybe there's something socio-affective here, Could it be that our emotional nature is a bit more fixed than our cognitive nature? I don't like the division between emotional and cognitive. I think it's just one emotional cognitive system. But some people think, well, no, you can't do much with your emotional nature even if you can change your cognitive nature. Personally, I think of even stuff like music as a sort of a kind of cyborg emotion technology. You kind of change your emotional state by playing music yourself. Or what about self-imposed limits? I haven't even said anything about that, but might we just decide at some point that enough's enough and that a sort of a snowball of self-reinvention is not necessarily a good thing. To say, okay, that's where we should stop. So there's the conclusions, I think. The main one is I don't think we should accept a neural, certainly, not even an animal, not even a biological model of persons and minds. I don't think that the person or the mind is somehow a function of some baseline, which is the animal or the brain. We need to be a bit more open than that. If we are more open than that, that will have implications for all sorts of fields: law, educational practice, social policy. They would all have to, I think, change in ways that sort of recognise and respect that fluidity. It suggests to me that we should certainly ditch the myth of the stable core biologically determined user. It's not that there's a little fixed user in the middle and the rest is all tools. The better way to think of it, I think, is it's all tools, it's all garments. It's tools or garments all the way down. And that's it. Thank you.
Within the context of studying Heidegger, and he didn't per se give a definition of what technology was, he more explained what essence was and how that might relate to us.
Yeah.
What would you, as of right now, as of this moment, define technology, and do you expect that definition to change in the future?
Yeah, I don't have a definition of technology. I don't have definitions of anything. I don't really like definitions. But I do think that we need a very broad notion of what a technology is. So that I would think of language as a technology. I would think of writing as a technology. So I don't think it's all about sort of kind of electricity or gears. I think it's kind of anything that is self-created, that is sort of humanly created, that can get involved in this process of self-reinvention. I think that's what makes it technology. I mean, the thing about not liking definitions, you can't even define table well enough for an AI program to recognize tables, so, not in words. So I don't think we're going to get far with defining more complex things.
Hi, just wondering, do you believe in ghosts?
Ghosts?
Yeah. Or spirit?
I'm going to say no. Do I believe in ghosts or spring?
Spirit.
Oh, spirits, sorry. No, I would say no, but that doesn't mean that they don't exist. I just not got the evidence yet.
But as you see, in the future, the human might build more and more like a robot, with the increasing function of the bodies, more strength, which robots have, maybe increase the mind power, which accelerate the speed, and the robots became more and more like a human.
Okay.
Right? So at this moment, with this trend, how do you think it's going to be any social issues in the society? Like maybe because the boundaries between man and robot become an AI or artificial intelligence. It's like blurred. So
Yeah.
do you think it's a good thing or a bad thing? Because people might get mad, arguments, or even war, as it's possible. But
Yeah, I don't think intrinsically these things are either good or bad. I think it's like just about everything. It's kind of how we as a society allow it to kind of arise and form and be used. I don't see any near future in which I inhabit a world with real AIs. I do think we'll see an awful lot of kind of human-machine cooperation, and so there'll be a lot of kind of AI type assistance, if you like, but I don't think there'll be independent intelligences for a while. I might be wrong about that. I'd rather like to be wrong about that. It would be fun, but I think personally that we'll have those yet. Not sure, maybe there's something else at the bottom of that question. Do you want to ask a bit more?
yeah.
Yeah.
Why not?
Yeah, right, that's it.
Yeah, and on the other thing, you mentioned the mind extends, right?
Yeah.
Extend the mind.
Yeah.
So do you think a man is a man is because they are built on the experience they have?
Yeah. I mean, experience is where all of the information is coming in through experience, but of course there could be bits of the extended system that aren't taking information in through my senses. They might be taking information in through their own senses, and I can nonetheless be an overall system that has some of those as my temporary, at least, parts, maybe my proper parts, persistent parts. I don't think that that's not the way that we currently work with our biological senses, but I don't see any reason why that kind of integration is not possible.
Where was that last hand?
Oh, I see, you were over there already.
I know, I just missed.
Sorry about that. That's my fault.
So I was rereading some Gibson in preparation for this talk, and I was thinking about, one of the core elements of a lot of his sort of stories is this idea of cyberspace as a, the translation of data relationships onto a space that our minds can envision spatial relationships in. And I wonder if you have any thoughts on future interfaces to information that are might be more useful to people than text, but merely as a general purpose.
Yeah, I mean, the sort of, to me that sort of conjures kind of neuromancer kind of visions of sort of actually kind of spatially experiencing the data streams and so on. That could be really useful. I think the idea that we could inhabit kinds of reality that reflect very high dimensional influences that we don't cope with very well in 3D reality. I don't know what the limits would be on our ability to make use of that kind of information or conceptualize spaces like that well enough to make sense of them. But but it is surprising what, so there are sort of programs that enable you to manipulate high-dimensional figures, so, figures that have more than the usual 3 dimensions, so you can get kind of used to what it's like to move these high-dimensional figures around. So I think if we can do that, maybe there's some hope for the kind of sort of, I don't know, extended use of something like spatial awareness, but in domains that aren't in any way related to natural 3 spaces. That seems entirely possible. Good thing to explore.
So, I'm still kind of trying to figure out exactly how to word this, so this might not come out as being the most coherent. But what I'm wondering is, with the example about like Evernote and that sort of thing, it's kind of like storing information in such a way, or even just like if you go on Google, because you talked about not necessarily knowing things, but knowing the most efficient way to get to those things.
Although I actually want to erode the distinction between those two, but yeah.
Well, what I'm wondering is how do other people play into this? Like, if I had a question about something, I could use Google, or I could, if I know, like one of my friends knew a lot about that particular topic, I could ask that friend.
Yep.
So is in a way is like asking somebody else, or having them remind you about certain facts about a mutual acquaintance or something like that. Is that sort of also?
Yeah. So we certainly, Dave Chalmers and I in the original paper do buy that as a possibility, that sometimes the sort of the kind of sort of learned dynamic between two people in any two people that work together or hang out together a lot could become sort of robust and well enough understood so that you start to lean on them more, and they could lean on you for certain things. That seems other people aren't different in this respect, I think, except I suppose that because they've all got their own agendas, they might sort of pop out at times. Other people have their own agenda a bit more than my iPhone has its own agenda.
So, like a lack of autonomy is one of the things that most technology has.
Currently, yeah.
Okay.
But I'm not sure that that's, I don't know that, it could well be that actually the more active nature of other people makes them better partners for this, because they can sort of more actively dovetail what they're providing to what you need. So maybe we can weave better circuits in that sort of way than we would otherwise. So I think that the sort of passiveness is not necessarily the goal. Yeah.
Okay.
But sort of the goal is something like, the sort of you would, in some sense of you, would have to have a sense of what sort of thing you should be able to do when those kinds of resources are available. It's hard to get the phrasing exactly right here, but I have to be careful not to push you back too far into the bio bit. But certainly there has to be a sense that you're not surprised by what you're suddenly able to do. Something
Okay.
like that. Yeah. Some people think actually that other people are a particularly good resource for this kind of thing because the information encoded in them has intrinsic meaning. And the intrinsic meaning is something that you need to really have extended minds as opposed to just sort of, well-woven access to externally encoded information with perhaps meaning that's parasitic somehow and stuff that we understand.
So my question is related. It seems like your talk has talked a lot about the excitement of ways that this could improve the way that we're thinking about things or extend the way that we're thinking about things. I'm curious what your thoughts are on the way that this can limit different ways that we think about things in the process of thinking.
Yeah, I don't see any obvious threats to how we think about thinking, but But certainly anything here that brings a benefit also brings a kind of limitation. So, you know, learning a new way to think about the world clearly limits the ways that you think about the world, because some old ways of thinking about the world won't be as available to you as they were before. And I think that's, you know, that's going to be as true in these cases as it is in every other case. So in that sense, you'll be gaining new limits whenever you gain a new capacity, but I don't think that's special to these stories, that's just part of the course. So something else I should get at there, if you want to hang in there for a minute.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking about the way that before we really started thinking about technology and the influence of technology to extend brain processes and exchange information, people are storing information in their brains differently because they have to store it to remember to use it.
Yeah, so I think that's right. I think it will make a big difference to what we think is worth the effort of biostorage. You know, what is worth the effort of biostorage is a lot of meta information about where to get the good information and how to get the good information. And that seems to me to be a trade-off that we will increasingly make.
I had a question about the tactile visual sensory substitution. I was wondering, is it known whether that tactile information is passed through visual system pathways and then into sort of spatial representation like the hippocampus or wherever, or does it just go through a different pathway and end up as pure spatial information?
There is evidence that it goes to the visual processing centres, so there has been some work on that, and it looks like after training, information there gets processed by the neural areas that would be processing visual information. It's not a total overlap, so there's some other stuff involved as well, and there's some stuff that isn't involved, so it's a little bit messy, but that's kind of what you would expect, I think. It's also what you would expect if part of what's going on in visual processing is that you've got kind of low-level evidence, if you like, and the job of the system is to come up with the best guess at what in the world that low-level evidence suggests. And in a way, it doesn't matter what form you're taking the low-level evidence in if it leads to the same best guess about how things are out there in the world, that there's an object at this distance with this shape, with this colour. So I think that's and there's all the ferret stuff, the rewiring of auditory stuff to visual stuff in ferrets, done mostly in very young ferrets. That might be a different kind of effect there in some way, but there, that was sort of the other side of that coin, showing that you could use what would have been auditory cortex to do visual processing if that's the way that you're wired up. So I think there's a lot of plasticity in there.
As technology becomes more pervasive in our daily lives, and like in the cases of the two gentlemen that you showed us, almost essential to daily life, do you think that it becomes true that people have a right to technology, or that they're all people are morally owed access to it?
I think that one of the sort of political implications of these sorts of stories is that a certain kind of access to technology would just be a kind of basic human right, because it would be necessary if you were going to, sort of flourish and develop in certain ways that are entirely possible, and lots of people are doing it. So I think we need to make sure it's a bit like water or something like that. Of course, there's always going to be inequalities, and we have talked about that a little bit earlier. But I think with the right sort of socio-political initiative, you could at least work against the inequalities as far as you can. And it should also be a basic human right to opt out of them. That would be interesting. But yeah.
As a result of this presentation, my entire notion of technology has changed. Previously, I've seen it as a way of attaining now, how I'm thinking of this is, it's a process. The environment, the phenomena that we see simultaneously creates our mind, and our mind simultaneously interprets that at the same time. Is that, I would like to know if this interpretation of the information that you presented to us is accurate, and if not, why it's not accurate.
I think I need to understand a bit more to be sure, but the sort of notion that what we're looking at here is a process in which there's a kind of two-way influence. I think that's exactly right. That's what, it's a kind of, we construct the niche and the niche constructs us in a certain kind of way. And it's a kind of rolling process of sort of evolving fit somehow. But I don't know if that's kind of, I was hearing something a bit like that, but that's because you said the word process, and that's what it made me think about. Just say it one more time, and then we'll see if we agree or we don't, or we just can't tell.
Yeah. I would refer to Kant's the critique of pure reason, maybe in the system he proposed in that. I'm starting to think maybe that's technology.
Yeah. I think it is a technology. I think any of these frameworks are technologies in some way. Anything through which we reinterpret ourselves is a kind of technology. That's the sort of broadest way I'd understand it. A process of self-reinvention, self-reinterpretation,
and constant creation as well.
Yeah.
It's a mixture of what seems to be these objects.
Yeah, a mixture with shifting boundaries too, between what seems to be a kind of object for the process and what now seems to be part of the process that is bringing new objects into view for the process. Something like that.
I see. Thank you.
That would be the case when, extended minds create technologies that then become parts of extended minds.
Hi there, yeah. Earlier we touched on the convenience at which you can adapt, or our ability to adapt to the use of tools. And I'm wondering if you feel that's an extension of our capacity for empathy, or for the fact that we may all have isolated versions of ourselves existing in those around us, and that we may have an inherent desire to manipulate those isolated versions through our limited means, and if that translates to a desire to extend mind to these simpler devices, the devices that are simpler to manipulate than another human being, perhaps. And if this need or desire to extend mind or to believe that it's extended is kind of linked to that need to cooperate for survival. And if that's the kind of underlying inherent ability that promotes or motivates a lot of us.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, certainly there's something fundamental here about notions like coupling and cooperating. They are fundamental. The idea that you kind of, you cooperate with something, you couple with something, the person and the windsurf rig, something, so it's kind of tightly coupled in real time, but it sort of feels like a single thing, responding to, to opportunities available in the world and making the most of those opportunities. So I think that is a sort of fundamental notion. Whether the sort of theory here is kind of driven almost psychoanalytically by a kind of, a sort of dim recognition of the importance of echoes in other people or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah, we touched on cognitive ease and our desire for cognitive ease.
Yeah. Is it for cognitive ease? Say that again. I mean,
we touched on earlier our inherent ability to be lazy. Our brains are lazy.
Oh, yeah.
The brain needs discrepancy, right?
Yeah. So I think it's certainly flowing from that. The brain's fantastic ability to do as little as possible to get the job done. I think that's right. And certainly, our basic experience of that is leaning on other people. I think that's right. So mean, actually, I think I was mentioning earlier, some of this for me comes out from a long time ago, thinking about Vygotsky and the zones of proximal development, you know, where the infant is kind of scaffolded through behaviours that they can't produce on their own by being kind of led through them by a caregiver. So, you know, there are roots in that sort of developmental story.
So I was wondering if we could go back to talking about people, other people as part of the extended mind, because you know, and I know you touched on it a little earlier, because you see like cases of toddlers with parents, or like old married couples, but also just people are unreliable and variable, and they have their own agendas, like you mentioned earlier as well, and just I was wondering if you could talk more about that, and also is there a line that you see between like where the accepted mind extends to and where it can't?
Yes, I don't think I see any clear line for where it can't extend to, because the extension itself is kind of manipulable by new tools and technologies and techniques. So in that way, I think that's a sort of ever-moving window somehow. The thing about other people, I'm not sure that I've got anything extra to say about the other people stuff. I mean, Susan Hurley thought that it was important that we kind of started off without distinguishing between ourselves and others, and that we sort of learn that somewhere along the way. So she thinks the kind of socially extended mind is a sort of default, if you like, and that we've had to learn to think about ourselves as sort of individuals, if you like, as cognitive individuals. And that all that the extended mind story does is kind of gets you past that and back to where you started from. And as I think I did mention earlier, you know, sometimes talking with Donna Haraway and Catherine Hales and people like that, they have a very reasonable worry that perhaps it's not always a good thing to think of other people in these sorts of ways, because it does mean thinking of them as a kind of resource rather than thinking of them as a person with all their own sort of agendas and needs and so on. And there would be a real danger in that. You don't want to treat other people as just resources. So I hope there's a line that can be successfully trodden there. I think we do manage to tread that line, and we sort of lean on other people for things without exploiting them, or failing to recognise them as people in the Buddhist sense.
I guess my question is, technologically, we're advancing faster than we ever have before. Do you expect any kind of societal or ethical dilemmas to arise from this rapidly expanding technological advancement and how we think about it? If so, what is the nature of those dilemmas?
Yeah, I suspect all kinds of issues and dilemmas will arise and are arising. You know, all these things already that we're seeing, Facebook and so on. You know, by automatically laying down trails as we as we use these things or extend ourselves through these things, we're simultaneously kind of giving away stuff that we might not choose to give away. You know, all this kind of trail type information. It's not quite an extended mind issue, but I think it's a real issue for these technologies that get deeply woven into our lives one way or another. I suspect that the main remedy for those things is just thinking about them and kind of educating ourselves as a group on what the options are, and making sure that there are more options available than maybe some of the big sort of corporations are currently making available. Yeah. But yeah, and there must be all kinds of issues and dilemmas and stuff about, you know, who gets the benefit of certain kinds of augmentative technology. To what extent should you be able to make it available in a very widespread way all at once, or is it okay to have early adopters that are kind of, super enhanced compared to other people, but then they're taking chances of adopting these technologies and it could all go horribly wrong, so maybe that's okay if they're chosen to be guinea pigs. You know, it's, there's a lot to think about there.
So, sort of going off of that and looking at like using other people as your extended mind, and even things like the parasitic humanoid, what does that do to responsibility? Like if this machine is teaching you how to do a surgery and somebody dies, whose fault is that? Or if the technology you're using to be your memory breaks, whose fault is that? Or is it, does your memory or does your responsibility extend with your mind, or like where does that get mixed up?
Yeah, I mean, on the whole, I think the whose fault is a question isn't always the right one to be asking. I know we do want to ask it for kind of legal reasons more than anything else, but you know, things go wrong, and the best you can do is try and repair the system so they don't go wrong again. I think, but in the case of, say, the parasitic humanoid, if you're performing an operation and something goes wrong, if that going wrong is clearly somehow the fault of the design of the parasitic humanoid sort of stuff itself, then I think I would be inclined to hold the parasitic humanoid producers responsible. So I think you're right, that suggests that sort of morally we are maintaining a certain distance, you know, between us, the kind of locus of responsibility and that temporary structure, even if the temporary structure is actually a fully integrated kind of cognitive machine, which is still a way that I want to think about it. So it's kind of, you know, those issues are very live. They're amongst the things that we're going to have to think about very, very carefully. I don't think there'll be a kind of one-size-fits-all answer to that. It will, you know, sometimes it might not be possible really to determine whether it was more the bio thing that was at fault or the suit itself that was at fault, or the designers of the suit or the programmers of the suit. You know, there's an awful lot of stuff goes in here. It's a bit like asking who's responsible when an aircraft crashes. You know, there are lots of, an awful lot of checks and balances, and things may have gone wrong at several points before anything really bad happens. You kind of hope that stuff gets structured, so you have to have a series of faults before anything sort of catastrophic happens. But that's not a good answer. I think it's just one of those areas that needs a lot more work. So we need bioethicists and technoethicists. Technoethics would be just as important as bioethics.
So to ask a question which I know you've written a lot of responses to, and you're probably tired of answering. But when everything is game for inclusion and selfhood, people, objects, tools, body parts, where does it end? Would you, I guess there's two possible setting responses that I envision. One is, it does not end, and there's this sort of physics-style, well, it just goes out ad infinitum, and it just becomes an impractically small part of your being. Or there is some point at which it's reasonable to say, this is not part of the person. Because, you know, a person can be part of your selfhood, and then that person has things, and people are part of their selfhood, and it's an ongoing chain, right?
Yeah, I mean, the construct of the self is even more puzzling than the construct of the mind here, I think. You know, I don't think we've got a nice, stable version of what a self is that can do the kind of work that question requires to be done to say much about it. I think we do have a kind of sense of our own self and kind of limits, but I don't think I should trust that sense any more than I would trust any of my other best guesses about myself. You know, I wouldn't trust my guesses about how my brain works. So why should I trust my guesses about, what constitutes me as a person? I do think that there's something in the Rob Rupert kind of story here. So Rob Rupert thinks of stuff that is kind of statistically woven fairly deeply into the suite of resources that are being used to generate responses on a day-to-day basis. It's kind of more you than anything else is, or more your mind than anything else is. So there might be some way to carve the cake like that. Then your iPhone will get in, but some little piece of information that you kind of touched on once but never went back to, or something that wouldn't get in. The only trouble with that is that I feel like that's actually holding the external stuff to a standard we wouldn't hold the internal stuff. If there was some little operation in your brain that was only ever used once, it just came online once in your lifetime, I think we still think, well, that was a perfectly good part of your kind of cognitive equipment. So I'm not sure we can do it statistically. It might well be that the notion of the self just can't bear the weight, and that we have to think of the self as just a kind of rough and ready term that sort of tries to capture the kind of, I don't know, the most currently active bits of some dense web of possibility, something like that. But then the self will be growing and shrinking and changing. I've kind of got used to that, or at least feeling like that.
Do you imagine that the world will eventually become a sort of human gas of different people's selves overlapping and boundaries are non-existent?
I don't know about boundaries being non-existent, but I think the sense of a lot more overlap than perhaps we once thought would be actually quite a good place to go. So yeah, I don't see why that wouldn't be a perfectly reasonable way for humans to change over time, to start thinking of themselves as a bit less separate from everybody else than they did before. Don't know about dissolution into a gas, that doesn't sound ideal. But yeah.
I think we're going to take maybe one or two more questions tops so that we can let everyone get out of here. I'm sure you'll have work as well. So we've got one over here, there's one over there as well. Yeah.
So I have a similarly self-based question. So taking into account the overlapping social self that you've been talking about, if you take away the shifting coalition of tools that make up an individual self, if you take control of those tools, do you take away that person's personhood? Or is there a coalition of tools just less expressed? So could you extend yourself into another person to such an extent that they're no longer a self? Like take a cult leader, for example.
I think you certainly could sort of very negatively reduce someone's autonomy that way. I think, clearly we see that happening. Just casting it in terms of the tools, it would be like, so if someone's got a sort of weave of technology around them and you slowly take control of most of the elements of that weave of technology, then of course I have to say that's a bit like taking control of most of the elements of the kind of neural weave, and that you would be interfering in a very bad way with them if you were pushing that stuff in a direction it wouldn't otherwise go. I guess if you took control of it, but allowed it to do all the things that they wanted it to do, or that it would be doing were it then, I guess that would be okay. I wouldn't worry too much about that. Maybe metaphysically, that you sort of feel that you were somehow compromised. If you knew about it, you wouldn't know about it, you wouldn't feel any different, so I think that would be fine. But yes is the basic answer. If you compromise enough tools, or someone else takes control of those tools, then you reduce the individual's autonomy. But that's just to apply the same response we have to taking control of bits of your brain, to taking control of bits of this other stuff, and that's the way the story's got to go. If I didn't say that, I'd be abandoning the story.
I'm wondering if the extension of the mind concept can be applied to the use of medications, and if you can see if you can like envision a future where this cycle of self-invention is spurred by like chemical alterations of the body rather than technical adaptation.
Yeah, totally. I mean, the chemical stuff counts as a technology as far as I'm concerned. It's just a technology that I don't know as much about. But yeah. And indeed, it's one of those cases where you can easily imagine technologies, chemical technologies, that we might start to have an obligation to take. Suppose there was a sort of an empathy-enhancing chemical that wouldn't downgrade cognition, it would just enhance empathy. Maybe we'd actually have an obligation to get that upgrade. Maybe it would be morally clearly wrong not to get that upgrade. That would be a kind of interesting position for a society to find itself in, where you actually have a moral obligation to get upgraded. But certainly, I think the chemical stuff and the genetic stuff, the CRISPR kind of stuff, these are all very deep and powerful ways of reaching in and kind of reinventing ourselves. Some of them are so powerful, I'm kind of scared of them, like the genetic interventions.
So I think we're gonna stop here, but as long as I'm not like writing checks that you can't cash, I think Andy's willing to hang out for a few minutes and answer additional questions. I just want to be sure that people that need to be on there.
Okay, sure. Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah. So let's.